Hello, welcome to Live from America podcast. This is Hatem. Unfortunately, Noam had a staff meeting last minute and he had to uh, cancel today, but very special guest. We've been planning this for a while. Saul. Isaac is a founder of Tangle, an independent newsletter, one of the most successful ones recently. Uh, Substack call it one of the most successful political newsletter on the internet. He describes the letter as right in the middle, which we're gonna discuss in a little bit. And he's here. Hi, Isaac.
Hey, Tim, thank you for having me, man. Glad to be here.
Good to have you, man. So I'm glad we have something in the middle finally. You started. You have thousands of subscribers, thousands of downloads, hundreds of thousands actually, and people following. So it's something that you started years ago, correct?
Yeah, I sent my first newsletter to 13 friends and family in August of 2019. And, today we have a mailing list of almost 300,000 people and podcast, YouTube, and a real business that we're running, a real media business. So it's been a long journey, but definitely been at it for a while and beating the drum.
So when did you realize that the world or the states here needs a middleman? That because your timing was right before COVID, which I think most people started to notice after COVID.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Trump was a pretty big shockwave to the political system and made it clear that the mainstream media was missing a lot of the undercurrents in the country. I was not surprised by Trump's victory at all in 2016. And I think part of the reason why is just my Genesis story, which is, I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is a swing county and a swing state. And so my friends and family span the political spectrum. I break bread with people who are diehard Trump, MAGA bros, and the far left Bernie supporters, and everybody in between. And I've seen, since I've become a professional reporter and started working in this industry over 10 years ago, that the media was not representing a lot of Americans very well, not accurately, and also that those different groups, friend groups, family members that I had were getting their news from just totally different places. And so there was no shared reality. There was no common place thing, news article, news source to jump off from. And that's really what my goal was to build a big tent news organization that was trusted by people from the left, right, and center, regardless of their political affiliation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right because I know a lot of people that, with different political views, and they're not bad people. And the one thing you hear from one side about the other is always like, oh my God, these are horrible people, or crazy people, or racist people, either or, from each side. And you look at your friends and people that think as like, no, maybe they just have a different point of view, you know. But, the other thing that I also noticed that news is not news anymore, it's entertainment, and that's how you make money. So how did you manage to make it a business? Because it's not for non-profit, it's a business for you, and which is
Yeah.
very successful. So how did you get that business model to work?
Yeah, so the problem of news organizations and the mainstream press generally being entertainment is a huge issue. News is not something that should be consumed like a Netflix binge crime thriller, but that is how we consume it, and it's how it's produced in a lot of ways, especially in the television press. So, I had a few main guardrails when I started Tangle. One was that I was going to give as much of the content away for free as I could because I wanted it to be accessible to as many people as possible. The reality is, in our country, a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck and they can't afford a $200 a year subscription to the Wall Street Journal. So even though the Wall Street Journal is producing a lot of really quality news and a lot of trustworthy news, many Americans just can't access it or don't read it. And so they go to websites that are free and they get less well researched, less well reported, less reliable information. So I wanted to give a lot away for free. The second thing was that I wanted to build a business on memberships and not on advertising. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I think there's a natural conflict of interest that arises whenever you rely on advertisers for money. So when I read, a big Axios newsletter and in the middle of it, there's a giant full page advertisement for Exxon and Axios is doing reporting on the oil and gas industry, it just makes me trust them a little less. And I'm not saying that they've done anything wrong. I think Axios is an awesome newsletter. I read it every morning and I love their content, but it creates a sort of kind of icky feeling for me that I don't really like. And the reality is, advertising revenue is a lot more fickle than subscription revenue. You know, the advertising industry ebbs and flows, and you lose that money pretty quickly sometimes. And so those were the two big things that I was focused on. And so when we launched, we had no ads in the newsletter and we were free for the first year and a half. And then I turned on paid subscriptions and asked people to support our work. And the way we motivate people to support our work is A, by telling our story that we're an independent news publication that's trying to be a big tent news organization for people of all political stripes, which a lot of Americans are interested in right now. And B, we paywall some content. Oftentimes the content we think is like most interesting or that we've put the most work into. So when you subscribe to Tangle for free, you get Monday through Thursday newsletter. You can access our podcast, which is ad supported. But when you pay for a membership, you get Friday editions, you get Sunday editions of the newsletter, you get ad-free versions of the podcast and bonus podcast material. And that model sort of allows people to try us out for free. And then those that can afford to subscribe and support our work, they do that. And it makes the revenue really predictable. And for us, it's been a really successful way to grow the business.
Yeah. I feel like, it used to be with any issues, you used to make up your mind, do your research first, and then make up your mind and then have an opinion. Now it's the opposite. You'll have an opinion first that you made up your mind about, and then you look for somebody to support you, and you will find them, because there's always somebody to support. So I feel like as a business, the easiest way to do it is to take a side and just crush it. That's the money way. But it's not gonna last, obviously. So this is one of the things that you've done that I like. I have a former congressman also is doing something like that. I have a couple of comedians friends that they do something like that. A lot of people know that you have to be in the middle. But let me ask you this. So when you cover, any story, like I love your TED Talk when you said, because I noticed that a lot, even when with COVID, with the war, with anything, uh the coverage, the wording of one side would be specific use, specific wording. And I think in your TED Talk, you said undocumented versus illegal, something like that, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so that little tricks, the little wording that only few people can notice, but it can really build either anger or happiness with inside you, and you don't even notice that. So how do you deal with stuff like that? Because you have people also work for you, right? So how do you manage that? How do you be like, okay, I really want to be in the middle without any human part of you or your staff taking sides and using certain
Yeah.
words that can trigger something?
So for us, the format is really our special sauce because every newsletter has this section labeled My Take, where I get to just share my own personal opinion. And that's a space for me to just sound off a little bit, to be a little bit of a pundit, to write my little mini opinion piece every day. And I also do it because it's an act of transparency, right? I want people who are reading our content to know where I'm coming from since I'm the one providing them the news. Like, I think it gives them additional context for my worldview and everything else they're reading. The hardest part in the newsletter to write is the explainer section. So, what we do is basically we introduce the topic, we explain, why this is an important story, what people are saying about what the basic facts are. And then we say what the left's saying, and then we say what the right's arguing, and then I share my take. And that's the general format. So that introduction section that you're talking about, where we try and be really careful about our language choices, that's the hardest thing to write because, yeah, if we introduce a story about the border and we say, 2 million illegal immigrants crossed the border in 2023, people will write in and say, no human is illegal. Liberals will write in and say, no human is illegal. I'm canceling my subscription. Like, you guys are clearly right wing, whatever. If we write that and say 2 million undocumented immigrants crossed the border in 2023, a bunch of conservatives will write in saying they're canceling their subscription because we're obviously liberals if we're calling them undocumented immigrants. So there are these language choices we have to make to try and not offend the sensibilities of either side in a way that allows them to hear the news we're reporting and then also get to the arguments, which is the core part of the newsletter, right? Like we want to expose people to a wide range of opinions from across the political spectrum. And if they're getting pissed off about something in that introduction explanatory section and they don't even read what the left's saying or what the right's saying or my take, then they don't really have their worldview expanded in any way, or they don't have their own views challenged in any way. So we made a lot of decisions about updating our editorial standards. And in a lot of ways, we do things differently than traditional news or the Associated Press or, Chicago style, some of the kind of mainstream ways to follow it. Because we're trying to talk to a broader audience than a lot of news organizations are. And, to your point, it is really easy to pick a side, hammer that, and make a bunch of money doing it. That's not what I'm interested in doing. That we solved that problem by using the term unauthorized migrant to describe people who immigrated here but are here illegally. And we chose that term because it doesn't obscure the fact that they've done something illegal. It's an actual legal term that the US government uses sometimes. And it doesn't dehumanize them either. It doesn't, we're not calling them aliens. We're not saying that they're illegals, whatever else, which I think is also important for half the country, but also because it's a better human way to talk about, people who are coming here for a wide range of reasons. And so I really like that change that we made. It's not something I see other news organizations doing, but since we've made that change, literally have not gotten a single complaint or question from a reader about that updated language. Despite the fact that, for the years before we made that change, I would get complaints all the time, what we used to do was we use undocumented and illegal immigrant interchangeably. And we would try and do both in the newsletter, and we just pissed everybody off. So this was kind of our solution, and it worked really well. And we've done that for a lot of different issues and a lot of different language choices on hot button issues.
So what is the percentage of, because I think one of the reasons that Trump won or that Democrat lost was the woke, the sensitivity about everything, all that. So how do you, like, what's the percentage of you being like, okay, I want to be sensitive to like some issues without being too much and just be worried to be either canceled or like I want to be also respected as news because the news is the news. If a person does that, this is the description of that person. So how do you also, because I find like we talking right now about the business model, the journalist model, you really doing it the hard way in everything, you know?
Yeah.
And it is, like I said, I admire people that does that. I have few friends that, doing that in different, categories, not just journalism, but even in, say comedy, books, whatever, but how do you look like, what is the percentage that you're gonna be like, okay, I am still, you know, doing it the way I want to, which is the main goal for you is to bring people together. Am I right?
Yeah, I'm not worried about the kind of online progressive left that I think is really sensitive and overly sensitive to a lot of language choices. They're not the people that are the barometer for us. In fact, our kind of fundamental guideline is we try and call people and describe things in a way that the people who we are describing or talking about would find respectful and would relate to. So, for instance, we call people who want to restrict access to abortion in the newsletter pro-life. A lot of liberals really don't like that because they say they're not pro-life, they're anti-abortion, and they support the death penalty or something like that as a common argument, which is fair. And like I understand where that perspective comes from, but people who want to restrict abortion rights, they call themselves pro-life, they register as pro-life groups. And if we call them something else, even though some don't mind being called anti-abortion, if we call them something else, then we're almost disrespecting their framework for the conversation, which we don't want to do. We want those people to read our content and be able to hear it and empathize with it. Similarly, people who are opposed to abortion don't often call people who are, pro-choice. They call them pro-abortion. But we don't find that that's accurate language either, because people who are pro-choice aren't pro-abortion. Their actual general principle that they're holding is that people should have the option. They don't want more abortion, they want more choice. So we know that that would feel disrespectful to them if we called them that. And that's kind of like how we respond to people on the left who say don't call them pro-life, is we say, look, a lot of people on the right want us to call you pro-abortion, but you're not pro-abortion. So like, this is how we do it. And I think people can generally hear that. So it's more about that. It's about kind of finding a way to respect everybody equally, put them on like a level playing field, and do it in a way that doesn't obscure the thing we are talking about, right? So another very quick example is something like trans treatment for, sex transition or gender reassignment. A lot of news organizations call everything in that umbrella gender affirming care, which sort of presupposes that like the trans person in question must have their gender affirmed by some kind of intervention, when that's not always the case, A. And B, it also kind of completely ignores this huge part of the country that doesn't think gender is something that you can simply choose or affirm. It's something that you're born with. It's sex, it's binary. So without taking a stand on that argument, what we talk about when we refer to, gender affirming care, we say specifically what kind of care we're talking about, because one kind of gender affirming care is like a social transition where you refer to somebody by their preferred pronouns and you call them by the name they want to be called. And another kind is surgery to change your sex organs. There's a huge ocean of things between those two things, but we call all of that gender affirming care, which I don't think is the right way to do it. So our general approach editorially is like, we will say specifically if we're talking about pronoun use or hormone therapy or puberty blockers or surgery or social transition, whatever it is. So we just like try and be more specific about the actual issue we're talking about, which adds clarity. It respects the wishes of both sides, and it doesn't kind of, presuppose the end of the argument. And we find this like a really effective way to talk about the issue, and it helps people sort of, wade through the political fighting and nonsense around it.
Yeah. So my next question is this. When news happen, anything happened, it used to be people were like, okay, what happened? They want to know the actual news, the breakdown of the events, who did this and why, and stuff like that. Instead, people are gonna be like, how I'm gonna react to it, who did it, so I can take a side. It's not coverage of the news. So, and that has a lot to do with, again, the point of like trying to make it entertainment. So we're trying to tell a story. The news try to tell a story. It's like, oh, well, this guy was walking this way and did this and that, and he belongs to this and he's this, with the discrete, try to really categorize like under one category so people can take a side, instead of telling the story. So in your newsletter, when there's a story, you tell it from both sides? Is that how it's different?
When we tell a story, we try and break down the most pertinent facts and context around that story in the most balanced and neutral way we can at the top of the newsletter.
Mhm.
But again, the format is really the key to what we're doing, because once we do that, we share these arguments and frameworks, the three best arguments we can find from the left and the three best arguments we can find from the right. So, yes, the front end of the newsletter is us just trying to tell you what happened.
Mm.
We're not trying to explain to you, how you should feel about it, what the perspectives are on it. We're just like, these things happened. Somebody shot the CEO of United Healthcare in the street. Here's the status of the manhunt. Here's what we know about the suspect. Here's how it went down. Here's how people reacted to it. Just like facts, facts, facts. And then we share a bunch of opinions and arguments about that story. And sort of delineating between those things, I think, is really helpful, because,
Mm.
what a lot of news organizations do right now, which I'm not a fan of, is they write straight news pieces, not opinion pieces, but they're written in a way that's telling a very obvious story that has a slant that is supposed to make you feel a particular way. So, I've done this exercise. Actually, one of the most popular newsletters I've ever written was a comparison of how the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times covered the exact same story and literally just taking it paragraph by paragraph and talking about the choices that they made in that story. And it's remarkable. And this is the straight news team. It's not the opinion section. And also, they're great reporters. The Wall Street Journal and the New York Times have the best reporters in the world. They're the most well-funded, well-paid, incredibly well-sourced reporters. I trust their work immensely, both of them, but they're telling two completely different stories about the same issue. So how can that be, right? Like
Well, you
how
said
can
the
that
key
be
word,
possible?
well paid.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but it's like, we have to do something about that because if somebody just reads the Wall Street Journal, they're living in a different reality than somebody who just reads the New York Times, despite the fact those are both really reputable news organizations.
Yeah.
And so this is my solution to that problem.
No, I think it's very smart. And also it's not only the way they report it, the way they deliver the news if you watch TV or something. It's like, oh my God, can you believe this? The extra acting in it, it's like ridiculous. Like you want to know the news, you want to know the details of the news. And also the breaking news thing. It's not breaking anymore. It's just like anything that just happened become breaking. But I like the idea of covering one story with the actual facts and then opinion from both sides. That's very smart. So for to bring people together. You hear every election, every newsletter, every anybody that's trying to be like involved with the public is always like, oh, I'm in the middle. I want to bring people together. What does it bringing people together means? Because it's not gonna you're gonna have not gonna have everybody agree on everything. To you, what is bringing people together from left and right and center in one place?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question. My goal is not to get everybody to sit in a circle and hold hands. I have no interest in that. I don't care about that. I don't care if everybody likes each other. I don't want everybody to agree. The fundamental issue that I'm trying to address in our country is that Americans don't actually understand each other. They don't know what the best conservative argument is for a border wall. They don't know what the best liberal argument is for giving the dreamers citizenship. They just don't know because people live in their own news bubbles where they're being affirmed, their priors are being affirmed by the news that they're consuming. So if you log on to Twitter, you log on to Facebook, you log on to Instagram, you go on TikTok, whatever it is, you're getting fed a bunch of stuff that these news organizations and these social media accounts think you're going to like. That's how the algorithms work. If you go into Google and you search something, Google's feeding you websites and stories that you used in the past that they think you're going to like that have particular slants. I am trying to break people out of their bubble and say, if you read our stuff, you're going to encounter a bunch of opinions you're not going to like. And you'll also see your worldview represented somewhere in the newsletter. And hopefully, this will broaden your thinking and turn the temperature down a little bit. And our readers, by the way, say that it does. I mean, the most common piece of feedback we get is that people say it makes me feel less insane and less crazy. And I just feel like I can consume the news without losing my mind, basically. Regardless of whether they're conservatives or liberals, that's one of the most common overarching reactions. So, again, we have what's called the perception gap in our country, where, if you ask Republicans, what percentage of Democrats do you think believe all police are bad people? They'll say 70 or 80%, when the actual answer is like 15 or 20%. When you ask Republicans, what percentage of liberals want, or you ask liberals what percentage of Republicans hate immigration and don't think we should have, open immigration in our country, they'll say 85% of Republicans believe that, when the real answer is like 40.
Yeah.
We just don't understand each other. And that's just like the broad who is in the country and what do they think without even getting into the arguments part of it. And so I'm trying to fix that problem.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the other thing is like also, about most issues, like you said, they don't have enough information and they don't, a lot of times they don't want to do the research. If any argument, like even the major one, the wars going on right now in the Middle East or Ukraine, or the average guy don't really know a lot of details or history behind anything before they doing that. I interviewed John Tierney a couple of episodes ago. I don't know if you read the book Power of Bad.
I
and
haven't read it, but I know his work. Yeah.
yeah, and we discussed about like the part of the news is like even with the election, it was always try to drive fear from the other side. Like in one side, the border, the crime. The other side is the immigration, the walk. The racism. It's always fear, and instead of like, and I think this is one of the major things that also doesn't bring people together because when you fear the other side, how could you do that? So, but also it's a very good selling point for the news. So, how do you work around that?
Yeah. Look, the reality is there are a lot of big, scary, bad things happening in our world, in our country. And it's okay to talk about those things honestly. I'm also not trying to water stuff down when it's serious or when there's an issue. I do think when you try and take the approach we do to the news, your headlines become less sensational, your images become less sensational. The general tenor of your writing is more grounded and based in reality and level-headed. And because of our business model, we don't need 1 million views on every article to succeed. We don't need 5 million people tuning in to prime time and rewatching the show again at 11 o'clock that they just watched at 8 o'clock. We don't need that. That's not our model. It's not how it works. What we need is an audience that likes and appreciates what we're doing so much that they're willing, that 15-20% of them are willing to give us a subscription, and that makes our operation run. So um, I just don't have the incentive to go viral or, to draw people in with clickbait headlines or sensational news. It just doesn't exist in the model that we're in. What we have is a different kind of trap that I also am very conscious of avoiding, which is we have like the audience capture issue. So because we need subscribers to thrive, one trap that we have is just giving people a bunch of the content that they want in order to get their subscriptions. And we can tell what kind of stories really interest people and what kind of stories they really want to read more of. And we could just feed them that over and over and over again, hit them with the dopamine and give them that high. But that's not in our like ethical moral ethos. It's not like we're going to publish stories that we as a team think are important for our audience to understand, and we hope that we can convince them that they're important and why they should care about them. But the big trap, the big risk that we have is the kind of audience capture trap, which I think, by the way, a lot of people have fallen into, including journalists I really respect. I mean, people like Glenn Greenwald or publications like the Free Press. I think that they give their audience a lot of the same genre of content over and over again that their audience wants. And they, in some ways, still don't tell them things that their audience doesn't want to hear, which I think you have to do if you're going to be an honest broker in the media industry.
Yeah. And like right now, you see all the media. There's an article that I shared with you on MSNBC. Like they had the lowest rating ever. And not only them, like a lot of the news in general, I think people start to be like, okay, enough is enough, and let's get to the independent ones, the ones that tell the story. I think one of the most important thing about Joe Rogan, and his podcast is popular is like without endorsing even Trump, he didn't know who he was going for. He's just talking to people, giving you a chance yourself to get to know them, from their
Yeah.
answers and stuff like that.
And for what it's worth, we just had the best month in November that we've ever had since I've been running this company.
Yeah.
In terms of traffic, subscribers, people signing up for the email, everything across the board. And I think there is a tide shift happening. And I saw the article you sent about MSNBC, which, I think is part of what's happening is a lot of liberals are just like beside themselves and are taking a break from the news, and they're just on a news blackout because they can't believe Trump won again. Because a lot of those media organizations didn't give them the lay of the land that they needed to understand that he was in a really good position to win the election. I predicted Trump was going to win the 2024 election. I could have easily been wrong. I wasn't super confident. It was a really close race. But I thought he had the fundamental advantages, and he did basically what I thought he was going to do. And I think I could see that clearly in part because I wasn't in the sort of the bubble that a lot of the people who are still in the traditional press sort of operate in.
Yeah, because a lot of the interesting part about the MSNBC story, or a lot of the news stories with the rating going down, is not just going down in general, it's going down during the CEO shooting, which is a big news story. So you rarely see the rating goes down during big news stories. So that was a lot of them. But I think has a lot to do with what you say. It's like you told me this, you made it sound like it's a landslide. You made this, you made. And a lot of people were like, "Oh no, this is not actually what's going on." The truth is way different than what you think. Uh, so if we take a story like, the CEO story, the shooting story, and when you see the reaction of, like, even without like the split of like right or wrong, or when you see the different reaction from the internet, from the people, there's a lot of people, I don't want to say celebrating, but they like showing like nothing, not a tragedy happened. Even if it's a bad person, we don't know if it's a bad person or a good person, but even if it was a bad person, you don't react to death or shooting like that, in a way. So how'd you cover a story like that from both ends?
So, first of all, I think there were people celebrating for what it's worth. And I saw quite a
Oh,
few
really?
people who seemed, yeah, who I think were making jokes about it, who were like, this is what happens. This guy's a hero. I hope he gets away, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I definitely think that sentiment existed. I don't think it's a popular or common one, but I think it was out there in some circles on the right and the left, by the way, mostly on the left, but also on the right.
Yeah.
Um, so the way we covered it is, we did a newsletter on it this week. We gave the introduction to the story. In the left section, we shared three arguments from the left. One of them was an argument not justifying the murder, but basically explaining that, like, this is what you have to expect when our healthcare system works the way it does, and sort of empathizing with the shooter's motive, or his alleged motive. I don't think we totally know exactly why he did it yet, though his manifesto seems to indicate that it was really about the state of healthcare in the United States. Um, the other two were, kind of one criticizing that perspective, criticizing people who are downplaying or celebrating it. And then one sort of making the case about why and how we should reform the healthcare system. And on the right, we shared three arguments that were mostly criticizing people on the left for celebrating the shooting and explaining why it was like an unproductive, horrific thing, which was pretty representative of how the breakdown was. My take on the story was mostly about the reaction that I saw and the sort of frightening social decay that I feel like our country's going through right now. That scares me a lot because I can empathize with people who are really upset with the healthcare system. My mom has had breast cancer 3 times. She's 3 times breast cancer survivor. And I've seen how fucked the system is, front and like, it's impossible to ignore. The example that I wrote about in the newsletter was that, she had chemotherapy when I was younger. And when she got cancer a second time, 20 years later, the doctors told her, your body's going to reject the chemotherapy and it's going to be this basically awful experience. But we can't get you insurance approval for the other treatment unless we try the chemotherapy first. So, like, we know this thing's going to happen, but in order for you to get the insurance approval, we have to do it. So I went with her to her first chemo appointment and basically watched them poison her and her asphyxiate and them have to inject her with steroids and, pull her head back so she didn't choke on her tongue. And then she could go to an insurance company and get approval. So I get it. Like, I've seen it and I get it. But killing the CEO of United Healthcare isn't going to change the system. I'm sorry, it's not. They're going to replace that guy with somebody else in 2 weeks. He's responsible to a board of advisors and shareholders that he's trying to maximize profits for. And there's all sorts of gross incentives and stuff there that we can fix. But like, it doesn't happen with some 26-year-old kid shooting somebody in the back in broad daylight in New York City. In fact, it probably weakens the position of the people who want to advocate for change because now they're all going to be painted as extremists like this kid is. So, 10, 15 years ago, people who didn't have pre-existing or people who had pre-existing conditions couldn't get health insurance in our country. Why did that change? Because there was political organization, there was legislation, there was a candidate, Barack Obama, who advocated for it. People threw their support behind him. He had the wind at his back and he got it done. That's how it happens. Like change is slow in our country and it's incremental and it's frustrating. But like if you want to change the system, that's the way you do it. So that's how I covered it. Like I understand, I get it. I've been there, I've seen it. I have that anger and that rage sometimes about, spending 12 hours on the phone with an insurance company. I know what that's like, but that doesn't excuse killing some guy who's a father of two girls and is, really genuinely not responsible for the system being the way that it is. And it's scary to me that people think this is like a good way to handle it.
Yeah. I feel part of the celebration and stuff like that that you mentioned was also people try to go viral. And TikTok, I saw this TikTok of a guy like going to the same place and doing the same. It's just like I think people are going crazy with trying to be famous or trying to be like out there. It's they will do anything, and maybe it doesn't reflect who they really are, but it comes out to other people. It's like, oh, look, this is okay to do, which is not. And you kind of answered my next question, but I wanted to ask that anyway, because I feel like there's a lot of stories. Like for me, also, like in this podcast, usually Norm and I, one of the good things that we have is like, we disagree on a lot of things, and we have two different views in a lot of things, but we both kind of like manage to listen to the other and also manage to understand the other point of view. So for you, when you are responsible, and I notice this a lot, especially during the war, the Gaza and Hamas attack and all this, like you feel that you are responsible for outlet, a major one. So, and when something hit close to home, how could you be with all the angers that you have? Like, obviously the story you share with your mom is obviously is horrible, and there's a lot of people that suffer like that. But even when it hit even closer, like, how'd you deal with this? Being like, okay, in one way, I want to be, this is my culture, this is what I want to do in this platform, no matter what. And something hits so close to home, to your heart, to your anger. How do you deal with that without trying to advocate for the side that you feel that is right, in your opinion?
Yeah. So two things. First of all politics is personal. I just carry that as a rule in life. Most Americans don't spend 10 hours a day watching, reading, consuming the news like I do. They have an hour a day, maybe, or, 20 minutes or 2 hours, but most of them are making political decisions that are informed by their personal experiences, what happens to them in the day to day. If they go to work and they work with a Muslim woman who wears a hijab to work, they are a lot less likely to fear and dislike Muslim people that they see on the news on TV because they know one who is nice and kind and they have a good relationship. And that's just like, that's our country and that's human. That's what it means to be human. So, knowing that, I think it's okay for me to bring my personal into the politics. So I write a lot about why I feel the way that I do. Like I just tell my story because it humanizes my perspective. And I do the punditry thing too. I cite the statistics and I write the arguments and all that. But I also try and make it personal because I think that's what people connect with. And when people disagree with me, at least they have that personal story they can address or think about or talk to. So the second part is like, to be honest, I do advocate sometimes. I mean, if I have a strongly held opinion, I don't hide it. My deal with the readers is I'm going to tell you what I think, but I'm going to be radically honest about my position, even when I know you're not going to like it. That's the deal. I'm not like trying to find a middle ground position for my take in the newsletter every day. I have no interest in doing that. There's plenty of people who try to do that. And in my view, that's like a ideology of its own. If you're just a centrist on everything, you don't really believe anything, you don't have any values, you're just like, oh, point A is here, point C is here, I'm going to go right to point B, and that's always going to be my ground. And I don't think that's like an honest way to live because nobody lands that way on every issue. So if I feel strongly about something, I make my case and I let readers discuss it and think about it and argue with me. For instance, I have really radical views on prison. I don't think we should be locking human beings in cages. I think if you actually stop to think about it, it's kind of fucking insane. Like you put a dog in a cage when it pees on the floor. I don't think putting human beings in cages is a good way to solve for them being violent, sexual offenders, whatever it is. I think we should rehabilitate people more in our country than we do. And I think we're missing a lot of potentially productive members of society by not doing that. That's a really unpopular opinion with my readers, like very unpopular. It's a radical position to hold. I know it is. I'm really conservative on other issues, like things like immigration or even gun rights or whatever. So this is a position where I agree with like the radical left about this position. And I know that, but I'm not going to hide that from my readers just because I want to take a middle ground. I just tell them what I think and I explain why I think it. And if I can convince them, great. And if I can't, they can judge me accordingly. And they do. And they sign up for that deal and they appreciate it. So that's really how I think about it. That's why I have that in my take section. I can do that. But if you read the whole newsletter top to bottom, it's my opinion's not the most important one. You're going to get a whole range of arguments, and my opinion's just one of 7 of them. And you can sort of plug it in and have it inform your views however you think is appropriate or fair.
Yeah, I think to me, being in the middle is not just not taking sides, like because I agree with you. You have to like it's human nature to have a side, but I think being in the middle is to understand the other side, try to understand it, not agree with it, but understand it, listen to it, stuff like that. One of the interviews that I've done, and I feel like kind of like describe that exactly. I interviewed Rachel Goldberg, the mother of the hostage Hirsch Goldberg, the late hostage Hirsch Goldberg, and she was,
Yeah.
she's amazing. She was, the way she was talking, like imagine her son is taken away. Unfortunately, he passed away. He was killed, and you know, a mother in that situation, and she's still able to see the others and said, "Oh, there's another mother in Gaza that can feel the same thing." Like, who does that? Like usually people will be just so angry. Would you blame her? She's like, "I hate everybody in there." No, but she managed to do that and see that both sides. She obviously taken one side, but to be able to see that, to just hear the suffering of another human being at the same time, and it's not there's two truths at the same time. That's what I mean about the middle. And for me, she was awesome in terms of like understanding the suffering of both people. So to your point with prison, you know, yeah, some people committed horrible crimes and they need to be punished for it, but why can't you see that this is also horrible? The death penalty or, stuff like I feel like some crimes maybe deserve that, uh, not all of them, but I really haven't thought about it that as much as probably you did, in that. But
Yeah. And I'll just say too, to add to that, like, I also think being in the middle or being a moderate, which I do think I am my politics are pretty all over the place. And I think I'm pretty close to the middle, if not in the middle. And I have very moderate, most of the politics I hold, I hold, um, you know, fragilely. Like you could change my mind on a lot of things. I'm an open-minded
I
person
agree
about a
with
lot of
you.
stuff.
And I think that's a
And
high quality, actually.
yeah, and to me, being in the middle or whatever is it's really about being fair. Like the problem that we have in the media space is there's a lot of hacks. Like the easy thing to do is to take the worst argument the other side has and then pretend that's their main argument and then dunk on that one. And that's what most people do. That's what a lot of pundits do. It's what a lot of TV people do. It's what a lot of reporters do. The hard thing to do is to talk about the best arguments other people have that really challenge you, that really stop you in your tracks, and then address those. And that's something that I try and do and take pride on and, seek out the people who disagree with me and try and find their arguments that are the hardest for me to counter and then wrestle with those. And
Yeah.
that I think is like being intellectually honest.
I agree with you. And I think like if you have one thought and you can't change your mind ever, it's not a thought, it's a belief. Then you have to make sure that you understand to have a belief, you have to understand everything about it. And you don't, nobody does. So it's good to have I always try to understand the other part, to justify, what's going on, in anything in the world. That doesn't mean that, you can take the other sides, like we were just talking about the CEO, like this kid, we don't know the story, but probably suffered from something. But whatever, no matter what, it doesn't justify killing another human being, it's just that simple, you know?
Yeah.
So if you get offered $50 million tomorrow and it's like, hey, you're doing a good job. Why don't you, lean a little bit this way? Not right now, but a little bit. Would you do it or not?
No, no. I mean, if I got offered $50 million to maybe sell Tangle to somebody who wanted to help fund our project and get us an even bigger audience than we have and spread the word, I'd consider that. But yeah, I mean, my morals and values and my worldviews at this point can't be bought. And fortunately, I'm in a place where this business is going really well and we're making a lot of money and we have really good margins, and so I get to pay myself well, and I'm financially pretty comfortable, and I'm incredibly blessed to be that. And not just because I'm a reporter and in the media industry, which is super hard, but because it's a hard time to make ends meet in America. And I'm in a good enough spot that you can't offer me a few $1 million to completely forfeit my worldview and my values. So no,
I will.
yeah, my morals aren't for sale, but maybe my business if somebody was the right buyer.
Well, the way I see it, I was obviously joking, but the way I also see it is like as a business stuff. And a lot of times, some people say that, especially when there are certain jobs, not necessarily in media, but in like say like in any system that have a lot of bureaucracy or something like that. It's like I'll do what I have to until I get to the top and then be able to actually make a change. Same thing is like if you own Twitter, you know, you can actually have a major influence in making the people come together, or so that's what I meant, and I was joking half a lot, but I feel like a lot of times if you get to we if we need if we manage to put the right people in the right places that have morals that doesn't change by money or values or stuff like the certain things, then maybe we'll get there. But you hear over and over politicians, especially saying something, and then once you get to office, it's another thing. So they just do it to get there, but they are kind of people that change their morals all the time. And those are the people that we don't know and we don't need in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, it's really true. And it's one of the downfalls of our current society right now is that money is a really powerful motivator for the value sets that people hold. And we see it with politicians, we see it with corporate leaders. Um, there's a lot of inconsistency and a lot of dishonesty out there from people who are in influential positions. And yeah, it's a hard thing to witness sometimes as just a citizen.
Where do you see Tangle in the next, like, say, few years?
So my goal is, I have no inclination to be the next CNN. I don't want to be a 500 person global newsroom, even if I could, which, I think that'd be really hard to build that business. What I want to do is I want to build a really small, well paid, super close knit team where, there's maybe 10 or 15 of us and I know everybody in the business well, and they're all really, really, really good at what they do. And we have a really, really, really big audience. So the goal for me is to create a small, powerful team that can produce really good work and is good at a few really good things like writing excellent newsletters, producing awesome podcasts, and that we have some weight to throw around, that we're influential, that enough people are reading us, that what we say matters, that we can influence the public discourse, change the dialogue a bit. I'm so grateful for how big Tangle is and how big it's gotten. And I have 4 full-time employees, and like I said, we have close to 300,000 people on our mailing list, but I want 10 million people on our mailing list, and I want 10 or 15 full-time employees, and I want like a little bit bigger team and a much bigger audience. And that's the goal for me because I think what we're doing is important. I think, I genuinely, genuinely believe that the more people are reading it, the better for the country. And I want to get the word out best I can, which is why I come do podcasts like this and try and preach the gospel a little bit.
Do you, what's your followers or subscribers like? Like male to female, young to old, left to right? Like, what's the percentage?
Yeah, so the key thing to me is the left to right thing. And um, I am extremely proud of the fact that our audience, basically since I started Tangle, has been about 40% self-identifying as liberal, 30% self-identifying as conservative, and 30% saying they were independent or other or some like different political affiliation that wasn't the traditional liberal or conservative. So we have a super, super even split, which to me means that we're achieving our mission. Now, the caveat there, which is a new one, is that about a month ago, This American Life did a profile of our work, which got aired on NPR. NPR's audience today, this wasn't always true, but today definitely leans left. So we just got a huge influx of like 100,000 new readers, and we haven't done our end of year survey yet. And so I'm expecting that the audience has skewed a little bit left now, which is fine. But I'll want to course correct with our marketing and advertising stuff. I want to invest in bringing on more conservative readers because I do think it's important that our community is representative of the country. Or else I think it makes it harder to say that we're sort of living out the mission that we have.
Yeah, one of the reasons I was asking because I feel like a lot of like older or middle age kind of have, certain ways of getting the news. I feel like the younger generation, it's harder just because of the technology, the how many outlets are out there, the social media, I feel like they need more to have more outlets where it's really in the middle so they can get the news, get the stories, get the education of making up their opinion about certain things. That's why I was asking this because I feel like all the younger generation will lean more towards the social media to get their first reaction news. Uh, so I think maybe that's one of the things that targets that Tangle should. I don't know the numbers, but
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, no, no, no. It's a good point, and you're right. The majority of our audience is over the age of 40.
Yeah,
So like, yeah, it's harder to get an 18-year-old to sign up for an email newsletter. There's no doubt about it. One way to address that is to try really hard and spend a lot of money getting a bunch of 18-year-olds to sign up for your newsletter. Another way to handle that is to just meet them where they are, which is more what I'm inclined to do.
yeah,
Which is, why we have the podcast. We have a YouTube channel. We have a TikTok page. We don't really use it, but it's there when we're ready to. And like, I think those are going to be good ways to reach those
yeah.
audiences.
I feel definitely the podcast is the way to go. Especially what's the podcast about?
The podcast is there's sort of two parts to it. One is just a read down of the newsletter. So it's basically the newsletter in podcast form, me and a co-host just kind of going through it, reading it. And then we interview people in the political world. So it's a lot of conversations, me interviewing people, people on my staff interviewing people who have significance in politics for whatever reason. And then we have a Sunday podcast, which is kind of the audience favorite, I think, which is my managing editor and I basically just sounding off about all the stuff that didn't make it into the newsletter that week and like keeping notes on what hit the cutting room floor and then kind of arguing about, things we disagreed on and talking about the week and stuff like that, which is really fun to do. It's cathartic.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think that the news is lacking a little bit. But you see a lot of like independence, like you see what's his name, Chris Cuomo doing his thing, Mahdi Hassan doing I forgot the name of his thing, but there's a lot of Pierce Morgan, like a lot of the major news people now they own their own thing even though they're not really in the middle, like obviously they take in one side and it's working for them, and that's okay, you know. Uh, but you feel like a lot of the legacy media is done, and that's you're gonna be the future. So I think that whoever is gonna be able to hold on to their position and really be fair, they're gonna be the most successful ones.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think it's where the industry's headed and it's clear the signals are pointing that way for sure.
So what kind of news do you cover? Everything or just politics?
Just US politics. Yep.
Yeah. And obviously, do you cover any like sports, anything like that?
No, but it's long term something we think about doing, franchising Tangle by jumping verticals a little bit, maybe getting into sports or changing geography, like doing a Tangle Europe or doing state level, more local politics. I think there's a lot of options for the format we're doing.
Yeah, but I like the idea that it's the U.S. news because I think if you manage to really be in the middle in this country and have influence that even the smaller politician that does a lot and can make a difference over the big scales later. I think that's gonna be huge. Last question: was there a moment in your career where it's like kind of like flip and you're like, fuck this, I'm doing my own thing?
Yeah, I did. I mean, it was for me, it was I had a job that I was trying to move out of, an editing job I wasn't crazy about anymore. And I was applying to jobs all over the media space. And I was getting final interviews with some of the biggest players, Washington Post, Business Insider, Forbes, like places I really wanted to work. And I got to seven final job interviews and I didn't get a single one of them. And when the last one came through, I was just so devastated and I was so fed up that I was just like, fuck this. I'm just gonna like start my own newsletter and see what happens. And that was really it. And it was the biggest blessing and the luckiest, in retrospect, it's one of those cliches. Like it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. Some of the people who I was being interviewed by to get a job in the last year have come to me looking for work. So it was an incredible turn of events for me, but it was a really dark, difficult time for me. And yeah, I just said, you know what, I'm just going to go for it. And it worked out. So I'm glad I did.
No, definitely. And were you always like have that kind of idea is like I want to be in the middle, I don't want to be influenced by anything, or was that always your take, or that changed as we go when you saw what happened?
Yeah, I'm going to answer this question, by the way, and then I'm going to have to run because I have
Yeah,
a
yeah,
2 o'clock right after this.
yeah.
Um, I was, I would say like over the years, I've gotten better at sort of flexing the muscle of, you know, listening to other people who I disagree with from the work of doing Tangle. But yeah, when I jumped into it, my politics were pretty all over the place. And I think that was part of what like positioned me pretty well to do the work was just, I wasn't super ideological. I was open-minded and that put me in a place where I could do what we were doing in a way that I think was really effective.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna leave the link for Tangle. Anybody want to sign up, and you should, in the description of this episode. Isaac, thank you so much. If you're ever in New York City, just hit me up and we'll talk more.
Thanks, Hatem. I really appreciate it, man.
Yes, have a good one.
All right.